Carl Lentz was known as the rockstar pastor of the global megachurch Hillsong. He was cool, hip, and in with celebrities and Hollywood elite. He even became best friends with Justin Bieber and had the young pop star living with him. Carl Lentz built a congregation of 10,000 a week that drew celebrities like Kevin Durant, Pratt, Selena Gomez, Kendall and Kylie Jenner, and more. Every Sunday, there was a line that went around the block as if people were waiting for access to a nightclub. Carl Lentz was one of the most prominent pastors in the United States, until he wasn't.
When he told you he was married for 17 years and had 3 kids, did you think, I can't be with him, I can't date him? Or did you think, I'm okay with that?
I was like, it's all good. I was married before.
But this story goes much deeper than just a mistress and has enough scandal and drama to rival a righteous gemstone. This is a story about pastors' wives throwing punches, literally. And it's a story about tithe money loaded onto debit cards and spent on luxurious lifestyles. It's a story about how a global religious institution and a celebrity pastor fooled everyone they claimed to serve. This is the story of a megachurch's fall from grace and how an ordinary guy with the right connections used Justin Bieber and his congregation to rise to the top.
And I am so all-consuming, and I am so unbelievable that if you will give away everything you have and take all of me, you will never thirst, and you will never be hungry, and you will never need another thing in your life. But you can't have half of this. You need to have all of this.
Carl Lentz was raised in Virginia by Baptist parents. The family was very involved with their church, and Carl was the youngest child and only boy. Carl's father worked as a TV executive and an attorney, and Carl has always said he had a good upbringing. After high school, while studying criminal justice at North Carolina State University and playing on their basketball team, Carl said he partied a little bit too much and that he was off track and being his own god. But he professed to never having a rock bottom moment. Carl said before he left for university, his parents warned he would see many broken people who weren't saved at his secular school, something he claimed to have witnessed. Carl left NCSU his sophomore year, moved to LA, and attended King's College and Seminary while working as a door greeter at Gucci on Rodeo Drive. Carl then transferred to Hillsong International Leadership College of Hillsong Church in Sydney, Australia. This is where Carl would make one of the most valuable connections of his life when he befriended a classmate named Joel Houston. Joel is the son of the now infamous Hillsong founder and global pastor, aka CEO, Brian Houston, but more on that later. Joel and Carl were inseparable, and while in Australia, Carl not only met his wife Laura, but thanks to his close friendship with Joel Houston, Carl got a behind-the-scenes look at what was quickly becoming what we now call a megachurch. Hillsong is a Pentecostal church that was started in the 1980s by Brian and Bobby Houston in Sydney, Australia. In the early days, Hillsong met in a public school hall with only 150 attendees, but by the year 2000, Hillsong had multiple churches around the globe and still had more growing to do. Here's Brian in 1990 leading a praise and worship service. Somehow people were attracted to this, and by February of 2022, Hillsong reported 150,000 attendees globally in over 30 locations. This isn't just church. Mega churches are an industry, and Hillsong is worth hundreds of millions of tax-free dollars. In 2014, Hillsong reported it brought in $100 million alone. Brian and Bobby Houston were Christian royalty who knew how to market to the spiritual, and Carl got to learn from the CEO himself as Carl began working for Brian while attending Hillsong College. Carl assisted Brian in whatever he needed. This included chauffeuring him around to meetings and to church. After graduating from Hillsong Sydney, Carl and Laura got married in 2003 and settled down in Carl's home state of Virginia. They had 3 children, and Carl became ordained and worked as the youth pastor for Wave Church in Virginia Beach, where he preached to teens about purity, waiting till marriage, and keeping their faith strong. It's been reported that Carl was very involved in the teens' dating lives. He wanted to know who they were dating and when. One day, a call came from Joel Houston with an offer Carl couldn't pass up. Joel's dad, Brian, wanted to launch a Hillsong church in New York City, and Joel asked his best friend from college if he wanted to co-pastor with him. Joel would lead the worship team, and Carl would do what he did best, recruit and preach. Carl said goodbye to his youth group and Wave Church. In 2010, Carl and Laura Lentz officially became head pastors in the place where Carl would have his most successful rise and most scandalous downfall, Hillsong East Coast, aka Hillsong NYC. Through Hillsong, Carl began making other important connections, one in particular known as Judah Smith. Judah is the pastor of a megachurch called Church Home in Seattle, Washington, and Los Angeles, California. Judah is well known in the Christian world and has a following of over 700,000 on Instagram. The God Squad all have a few things in common. They all evangelize the prosperity gospel. They only wear luxury designer clothes like Gucci, Prada, Yves Saint Laurent, and more, most of which cost thousands of dollars per item. The God Squad utilizes private planes, and their churches have VIP sections where the front rows are reserved for celebrities only. Inside their churches, they have roped-off backstage areas that lead to their green rooms, where they relax in between sermons, watch their favorite sports players on giant TVs, have tables of delicious food, and celebrity stylists waiting to make them look good. Only the inner circle of the God Squad is allowed in these private backstage rooms. The God Squad members have personal chauffeurs, assistants, shoppers, house cleaners, babysitters, and dog walkers. Oh, and most of this work is done by volunteers from the God Squad's congregations. In 1999, while working as a pastor in Seattle, Judah got lucky and made one of the most important connections in his life when a woman named Patty drove 90 miles from her hometown of Toronto to attend a Christian conference where Judah was preaching. Patty liked what she heard, and she left the conference with a few of Judah's tapes. 11 years later, and still a fan, Patty reached out to Judah and said, "I don't know if you've heard of my son, but he needs some good influences in his life. Would you come to one of his concerts and meet him?" Patty's son was 16-year-old Justin Bieber. Whether one is a fan of Justin Bieber or not, it's hard to ignore his superstardom. Justin is one of the best-selling music artists of all time, having sold 150 million records worldwide and earning 8 Guinness World Records, including the title of first ever solo artist to have 3 #1 US and UK albums before the age of 18. The person who held that title before Justin earned it in the 1970s, and it was a young Donny Osmond. In 2010, Justin became the youngest person to ever win an American Music Award. He was 16 years old.
But the American Music Award goes to Justin Bieber.
I want to thank everybody, my mom for giving up so much for me, my family, my dad. But you know, I really got this opportunity really about a year and a half ago, and really was embraced by a man named Usher Raymond. And I don't know, but I feel like he's had such an amazing career, and it would be only right if I invited him up here to share it with me.
Success came at Justin fast, and only 2 years later, when he turned 18, Justin was given full license to a bank account with $100 million waiting for him. And then Justin began making headlines for other reasons only 1 year later.
And 1 week after being charged with driving under the influence in Miami, pop star Justin Bieber is charged with assault this morning in Canada. He surrendered to Toronto police Wednesday night. Bieber is accused of beating a limo driver in the head last month. His lawyer says he's not guilty in both cases. More than 100,000 people have signed a petition on the White House website calling for Bieber to be deported to Canada.
By his own hand, 2014 was a rocky year for Justin. He was sued by his neighbor for egging his mansion and causing $20,000 worth of damage, and later had to pay his neighbor $80,000. Then, Justin was later arrested for a DUI and charged with resisting arrest.
That grinning mugshot in stark contrast to a nervous-looking Bieber biting his lip during his bond hearing.
The first case this afternoon is Justin Bieber.
According to People magazine, Bieber was seen in tears after he appeared before the judge.
Following the hearing, a source tells People that Justin was bawling his eyes out when he got back to the detention center.
Bail was set at $2,500, the standard for the 3 charges Bieber faces.
This is the same year that Justin would get closer to Carl Lentz and become a regular member of Hillsong NYC. Justin was introduced to his East Coast pastor via his West Coast pastor, Judah, and both pastors have pet names for their pal, Justin. Carl calls him Buckaroo, and Judah calls him JB. Justin was now having scandal after scandal, and there was a media frenzy. Justin Bieber was born to an 18-year-old single mother in Canada named Patty. Patty and Justin were close, and Patty nurtured Justin's musical talents, but Justin would later admit that his relationship with his mother deteriorated significantly around 2014 when he was harassing his neighbors and getting arrested. But while one relationship deteriorated, another was blossoming. Pastor Carl swooped in and offered to be a shoulder for Justin to lean on, and Justin took him up on that offer. Justin ended up moving into Carl and Laura's home for about 6 weeks, where he hung out with the family, played video games and basketball with Carl, attended Hillsong NYC, and tried to lay low from paparazzi. But not too low, as they were photographed during that time at a Knicks game together with Usher. Carl claimed that while Justin stayed in his home, tabloids made up stories about Justin. Things Carl said he knew Justin wasn't doing because he was staying with his family. Carl, however, was not laying low, as he did an interview with the New York Post that same year, and he told them he was now Justin's spiritual advisor. Carl also told GQ, quote, "This boy is 21. He's in a horribly toxic world. He is trying to do his best to figure this out. He has never been anybody but who he professed to be, which is a work in progress." End quote. It had been 4 years since Carl became head pastor at Hillsong NYC, and things had changed. Carl now sported 10 tattoos, a slicked-back mohawk, and was bringing in over 5,000 attendees to Hillsong NYC every week, including celebrities like Pratt, Selena Gomez, Kylie and Kendall Jenner, and Vanessa Hudgens. Carl baptized NBA star Kevin Durant and hung out with Jay-Z and NFL player Russell Wilson. Carl was also beginning to make public appearances in mainstream media, with one of the first being on Katie Couric's show in 2014. During an interview with the New York Post that same year, Carl was asked if Justin's friends are a bad influence on the Canadian star. Carl scrunched his face and replied, quote, "I think relationships in your life come and go, and I think what defines you is how you gauge who needs to stay and who needs to go," end quote. Later on that year, Carl received a midnight phone call from his buckaroo, Justin. Justin wanted to be baptized and made anew. Carl told him no problem and they would soon schedule a time. But Justin said no, it couldn't wait. He needed to become that new person right away. Knowing the hotel where Carl normally did baptisms wouldn't have their pool open at that time, and wanting a large enough tub, Carl called up the former New York Knicks center Tyson Chandler, who stood at 7 feet tall, and asked if they could use his bathtub for Justin's baptism. Tyson agreed, and at 2 a.m. one night in 2014, Justin Bieber was baptized. Justin's 2 a.m. baptism became a marketing highlight for Carl, who not only spoke of it in almost all his interviews from 2015 to 2019, but he also signed with United Talent Agency around the time he baptized Justin. United Talent Agency is based out of LA and states they help the world's most inspiring people make the world a more inspiring place. In Carl's agency booking profile, it makes sure to mention the celebrities he's baptized, as well as his booking prices. Carl is willing to speak at another church or event for a price of $25,000 to $40,000 per event. Thanks to his closeness with the young superstar, the media couldn't get enough of the celebrity pastor. Carl was interviewed on The View, Good Morning America, and Oprah's Super Soul Sunday, where he talked some more about Justin and promoted his new book, Own the Moment.
So wait, do you like being called the rockstar preacher?
No, I don't.
So did I just offend you? I'm sorry.
No, not offended at all. I mean, it's just an honor to have anybody even care about what we're doing. So you can call me whatever you want.
All right, well, you actually have a disclaimer at the top of your book addressing the church's celebrity factor. Why did you need to address that?
Well, I think the word celebrity means one that is celebrated. So when people say, do you have celebrities? And we always say, well, we think everybody deserves to be celebrated. So, but in the context of New York City, yeah, there are some people that are well known, but I think 99.9% of our church is made up of really faithful, amazing people that might not be well known.
Yeah, how many people flocked to your church? Did you say 19,000 to me in the break?
No, but I like that number.
Okay, all right.
I don't know, it could anywhere between 8,000 and 10,000.
Okay, well, that's still pretty significant.
Carl also made the rounds on YouTube.
So our thing is when you start defining your life, that's because you know Jesus and you start to understand what the Bible's really about. And we win sometimes because people have had so many bad experiences with church and religion. So they step into our church like, oh, this is the greatest thing ever. And we're like, sorry you feel like that, because it's not. But it's like if you got food poisoning at 5 restaurants, you'd be real hesitant to go to the 6th. Yeah. But if you just survived that 6th outing, you'd be like, that's the greatest restaurant in the world. That's kind of what we're dealing with.
So you're the Cracker Barrel of the
if that. We're the Applebee's, like maybe. You know, we are the 7-Eleven deli.
Wait, why do you say that though? What?
Well, why do I say what? Like,
why is it?
Why lower the esteem of your church?
Well, it's not that I'm lowering it. I think I'm just trying to put it. I love our church. It's just sometimes we want to make things spectacular that aren't. And if you came to our church, you guys would be like, this is cool. But it's not like this thing that's spectacular because God uses regular people.
But is this you being incredibly humble?
No, I think this is just me being real. Okay. I mean, we work hard and we have a good, thing that we produced when it comes to a service, but the real story of a church are the people that make it up from Monday to Saturday. And that's the stuff that, like, our church gets media coverage because there's famous people. Yeah. That's it. It's just because in some media circles, they just cannot believe that people who are famous also want to make sure their soul is intact. So we have like 99% of our church are not, these wildly famous people. But because we have some, they're just like, this is a celebrity church. And this is so, and it's like, it is what it is. Well, whatever you want to, talk about to get us in the room, we'll do it.
Are there any religions that you think are just straight up silly?
Get me in trouble. No, I
like Scientology. You're not like, hey.
Well, the moment a Christian says Scientology is crazy, I always say, do you know what you believe?
Okay.
You believe in a virgin birth? You believe a guy walked on water?
Parting the sea.
You believe that this guy healed lepers? You believe he raised the dead? So before you judge a Scientologist, make sure you check your own crazy beliefs. So no, because the same measure of judgment I use for them, I got 2 pointing back at me. So I don't think anybody's religion's silly. I might not get it, but I'd like to hear why you worship dogs and have crystals in your house. I want to know.
Yeah. Would you be willing to say, hey, after they told you, if they had a silly answer, that your dog worshiping and crystal worshiping is silly? Or would you?
If I knew them well enough. Nah. If I knew them well enough.
Like you'll just let them go, do their thing?
Most of the time I'm ready to learn.
Okay.
But there are times where I will say, hey man, you're crazy. This makes no sense logically, as long as you know that.
It was during this time that Carl and Laura moved into a $1 million home in New Jersey. Carl was experiencing more success than ever before, and it appeared that he loved it. It seemed as if Hillsong loved it too, as shown by this strange interview from the Hillsong Conference of 2017.
Hey guys, welcome back. We're here at Hillsong Conference 2017, having the best time, and got some good friends of mine that have stopped by on the couch. We've got Chad, Justin, and Carl. I love you, man.
I want you to know you're loved.
Thank you so much. Guys, so how you guys doing? Are you guys enjoying conference, Carl? You're wearing a Hillsong college
jacket. You see these boots?
Those are very cool.
It wasn't your turn. Off-white. These are off-white.
It wasn't your turn.
These are off-white.
So
these are off-white.
Chad, good to see you.
Shout out Virgil.
Shout out Virgil.
Virgil, do you watch CBS?
You see his talk? We watched his talk together.
Yeah, it was a very good talk.
Very good.
So guys, really quick, you guys have been all over the place. Carl, how you doing? How you enjoying conference so far?
You know what? We had the best day today.
Yeah.
I just enjoy seeing people worship, praising God.
I think it's always really kind of wild and amazing to watch such young kids passionately
them praying.
in.
Just real, authentic,
Absolutely.
Enzo. So, theme closer, what does that mean to you guys?
I want to live a life that's closer to God than ever before.
Absolutely. Justin?
Samesies.
Samesies. Carl?
I want to get close like that wisp. Is to Justin. No, I want to get better. That's why we all came.
I just want to love people more. I just want to love Carl more.
You're doing a good job with that.
So,
man.
Justin, this is your second time at Hillsong Conference?
Yes.
And what's different this time about being here?
I just think my faith grows every day. So my faith is stronger than 2 years ago. Better, stronger, wiser, kinder.
I think anything that you invest in, there's a return. Yeah. So there's a lot of people investing in different things. We all chose to, let's go invest in this. And our return has been supernatural.
Yeah.
Stuff you can't necessarily quantify, but my gosh, it changes your soul. So anybody who's thinking about it, I would just say, look at what you invest in now and what the return is. If you don't like that, I would say maybe have a look at investing. It doesn't have to be this per se, but something that builds your soul. For us, it happens to be this, and we got room for anybody. We have to go, but we're all going to shout out our moms.
Okay. Let's start with
So I'll
you.
go first. I'm down here. Kathy Lentz, I love you. I miss you. Thanks for being my mom. I think you're the greatest. Tied for probably top 3, 4 on this couch. But Kathy, I love you.
We love
miss
you, Kathy.
Mom.
She's a great.
Love you, Kathy.
Patty, my mom, love you so much. Miss you. Hope you're doing awesome.
Closer on 3.
Put our hands in here. 3 ninjas on 4.
No,
3
closer.
Ninjas? Okay,
Closer.
Closer on 3.
1, 2, 3.
Closer on 3 ninjas. We love you. Bye.
That same year as the Hillsong Conference, Carl flew to New Zealand to be with Justin while he was on his Purpose World Tour. Carl and Justin visited a New Zealand bar and were photographed doing tequila shots, where Justin then removed his shirt. This was only 1 week after Justin performed in Melbourne, Australia, and the press he received there wasn't good. It was said Justin gave a lackluster performance, didn't seem to enjoy the concert, and it was also in Melbourne when he refused to take a picture with a fan and told her, quote, "Look at you, you make me sick," end quote. On that same Melbourne trip, Justin was photographed partying with models on a yacht. It was reported that Justin had 3 rules for the invited women on board. Number 1, sign a non-disclosure agreement. Number 2, surrender your phone. And number 3, be a model. Some were beginning to speculate that Carl and Justin were a little too close, and that Carl was negatively influencing Justin or vice versa. Whether Justin was going through a rough time or not, this speculation was brought to light when only 4 months after Carl and Justin were seen in a bar together, Justin abruptly canceled the rest of his world tour to get closer to God through his spiritual advisor, Pastor Carl Lentz.
Any message for the fans?
I love you guys. I think you guys are awesome. Sorry for anybody who feels like disappointed or betrayed. It's not my heart or anything. And have a blessed day.
Huge rift in Justin Bieber's world with people he works with and also among his fans because he decided to not complete the tour, which only had 14 dates left.
It would be a great measure of good faith to find some way to compensate the crew and the people who are relying on him for the rest of it. That would be something that Jesus actually would do.
My thing is, he's very wealthy. He's been with Carl Lentz for the past month. He has what, a little more shows, and why not take Carl with you on the road? Or why not take a pastor and do all these things that he's done in the past and FaceTime?
One of the most well-known celebrity names attached to you and your church is Justin Bieber, and in fact, his name's Justin Bieber. Have you heard of him? He said he just wanted to love you more after he announced that he was canceling his tour. A lot of people have asked, how much are you guiding Justin in his decisions? Did you have anything to do with that?
Well, he wasn't talking about me. He was talking about God. He just wants to love God more. I don't think he even likes me sometimes, Justin. I think that we don't have a hand in decisions like that. Justin's a grown man, and he made a decision based on the well-being of his soul, which I think is awesome. And my role in his life is just to give him help and guidance when he needs it, but he doesn't need, somebody making decisions for him. He made his own.
As Carl and Justin became closer, many speculated about his influence over the young pop star. This was also the same year that the first accusations against Pastor Carl were made. Accusations that Carl had cheated on his wife Laura with 2 different women. This was reported to Hillsong by a former Hillsong NYC group leader. Before November of 2020, the global religious institution that is Hillsong didn't have a human resources department or a code of ethics in place. And this Hillsong NYC group leader who anonymously spoke to the press said, quote, "Women came to us and said Carl was sleeping around with people who were members of the church," end quote. This leader then reported Carl's affairs to other Hillsong pastors, only to be dismissed and told she was spreading gossip. The source said they were later kicked out of Hillsong NYC after coming forward. Not one to let his star be diminished, Carl carried on with his media tour, even selling his merch in the church.
How many single people do we have here tonight? All right, how many married people? All right, whoa, wow. All the single people, I like to do this at our church. I'll just throw this out there real quick. Once a week, we give a church pickup line. So if you're here, if you're watching online, just try this. Maybe grab your Bible at some point and try to sit next to somebody you've been church stalking for a while. Church stalking is where you just show up next to that person randomly at every service. Like, oh, here we are again, hey. And this is my classic one. Maybe next time I'll come, I'll bring something new, but I don't have to when this one's this good. You want to look at somebody you like in church, and you want to say, hey, my Bible's incomplete because I'm in the book of Numbers and yours isn't in there.
In interviews, Carl came up with the tagline that his church would reach everyone from the faceless to the famous.
We're going to reach everybody here. We say from the faceless to the famous.
But as Carl called it, it was the faceless who were being exploited behind the scenes with something Hillsong referred to as their honoring system. Honoring is Hillsong's word for volunteering. Honoring could consist of volunteers arriving at church at 5 a.m. before the pastors to help set up for Sunday services, with volunteer cleanups sometimes ending around midnight. That's because Carl didn't just preach one Sunday service. Hillsong NYC could hold up to 6 services on any given Sunday, and there was always a line around the block where people stood waiting to enter Hillsong NYC for hours. Volunteers also chauffeured pastors and leaders to church, appointments, salon visits, cleaned their homes, brought them snacks, and even met their honoring duties by being designated drivers. Another time, it was reported that in the Lentz's household, house cleaners and dog walkers were not supposed to look at nor speak to Carl or any of the church leaders while in his home. Ex-Hillsong NYC members recall Carl being a very exclusive pastor, one who was hard to get to. Unless you were a celebrity or influencer in VIP seating, you weren't getting backstage, you didn't get a space up front reserved for you, and you didn't get any private meetings with the pastor. As a member of the stage managing team at Hillsong NYC, Janice Legata told Business Insider that Carl was spoiled, pampered, and coddled, and that he had to have his coffee hot at all times. Janice said, quote, "People would be running errands all day back and forth to Starbucks to make sure that Carl had his fresh coffee. Hillsong pastors also received debit cards that were loaded directly with tithe money to purchase designer bags, 4-wheel ATVs, brand new iPhones, and fancy dinners." While Carl wouldn't often make time for the faceless members of his church, he wrote on his Instagram in February of 2020 how his marriage goal for that year was to see each other more. Carl wrote, quote, "Might sound simplistic, but after 16 years on this journey together, you realize it takes more intention than you realize. So we are off to a good start, from practical 10-minute walks together on a routine day to special getaways when possible like this weekend," end quote. But later that same month, a well-known contagion began spreading throughout the US, something that would affect the entire world. By March of 2020, the United States went into lockdown. Hillsong NYC went to online services only, and although he was safe at home with his family, Carl was lonely. In quarantine, Carl no longer had assistants at his beck and call, no chauffeur, no hot Starbucks in his cold little hands, and no stage to preach from while an audience of thousands cheered. Only 3 months after writing that Instagram caption about getting closer to Laura and taking daily walks together, Carl would take a walk alone, where he would introduce himself to another woman, and it would be the beginning of the end.
Happy birthday! That, hold on, Joey. That is insane. I'm sorry. Hold on.
Carl was feeling lonely, and while sitting in Brooklyn's Domino Park without his wedding ring on, Carl saw a woman he wouldn't look away from. She was tall and beautiful, with wavy hair and tan skin covered in tattoos, and she was looking for a place to sit. Her name was Ranin. At this time, Domino Park had painted circles on the grass for people to sit in to maintain social distancing orders. Carl invited Ranin to sit in his circle, where they fell into deep conversation. Carl asked if she was from the Middle East, and then told her that's where the most beautiful women come from. Carl learned Ranin worked in New York as a jewelry designer. When Ranin asked what Carl did for work, he refused to say. Ranin pressed a little further, and Carl told her something along the lines of, "I work for celebrities. I manage them." Ranin asked him what exactly he did for celebrities, to which Carl replied he traveled with these celebrities and helped them out like a sports agent. But Carl said he didn't want to say any more. When Ranin asked Carl his last name, he wouldn't even tell her that, instead asking her one question. "Will you please not Google me?" Ranin agreed not to seek out Carl's identity, but once she was home alone in her New York apartment, she Googled Carl and saw he was a married pastor. Ranin would later ask Carl if he was married, to which he admitted he was. Ranin wanted to know if there was something wrong with Carl's marriage for him to be with her, but Carl allegedly said, "No, nothing's wrong. It's you. I know when I see someone, and you have everything I want in a woman." Ranin and Carl met on Friday, saw each other again the next day, and kissed by Sunday. Ranin didn't have a problem with Carl being married, as she would later claim in a Good Morning America interview that, quote, "I thought, it's all good. I was married before. I didn't want to judge him because I like to meet people and feel like they're a blank canvas. You get to know them and let them paint their own colors on it. You don't go and just put stickers on people and think they're going to be that and then they're this. And I didn't want to do that to him because I didn't want to judge him." End quote. But a married man with 3 children is not a blank canvas, and over the next 5 months, Carl would go to great lengths to hide all communication with Ranin, including saving her number in the Notes app of his phone, so his wife Laura would be none the wiser. Carl would tell his family he was going on a walk or to check in with a friend or church member, and then he would sneak out with a backpack, make a stop at a liquor store, purchase a bottle of tequila, hide it in his backpack, and secretly head over to Ranin's apartment. Their drunken affair continued for 5 months, with Ranin later telling the Daily Telegraph that the pair spent their relationship drinking top-shelf tequila and that she believed Carl was trying to escape his, quote, boring life. Ranin would later say in an interview with Discovery Plus that she believes in signs and that it wasn't a coincidence her and Carl's relationship happened. I feel it's important to tell you that from my research, either Ranin Karim has changed her story several times, or the journalists she told her story to had errors in their reporting. For the sake of this video, I decided to mainly go with the story from the interviews Ranin gave immediately following her and Carl's breakup. That would be the exclusive interviews she gave to Vanity Fair, Good Morning America, and the New York Post, to name a few. Carl had a life many could only dream of, and whether he found it boring or not, he wasn't able to escape it for very long, because one fall day in October of 2020, everything would change when Carl wasn't paying attention and left his laptop, which was connected to the cloud, open by accident at the church. Carl's wife Laura and other coworkers were in the same room when they happened to see texts and photos pop up on Carl's computer. Photos of Ranin Karim. Photos that a married pastor shouldn't have. They began to investigate and discovered more messages, photos, and videos between Carl and Ranin. It was at this moment Carl's life would forever change.
ABC News exclusive, the woman allegedly behind the affair that brought down Hillsong Church celebrity pastor Carl Lentz speaking out. And Amy is here with more. Good morning, Amy.
That's right, Michael. Good morning. It was a huge fall from grace. Carl Lentz's global following included Justin Bieber and a long list of celebrities and pro athletes. Well, now, without a job and trying to repair his marriage, his former mistress tells us her side of what happened. Did he tell you he loved you?
Yes, he did.
Did you love him?
Mm-hmm. He's like, I work with celebrities, and I say, what exactly you do? And he keeps saying, I manage celebrities and I travel with them. He didn't want to say what he does.
Did you think that was a red flag? He won't give you his last name?
Yeah, it was. Because, I don't know, it was really strange.
Kareem says she searched online and found out more about him.
I realized that he's the pastor from Hillsong, and I was like, oh, I was at this church like 6 years ago.
You had been to Hillsong?
One time. Only one time.
She says she confronted him.
I told him, I know who you are, and I'm not here to judge you, but I have a question. I was like, there's something wrong with your marriage that you're sitting here with me? He said, no, it's you.
Kareem says she tried to break the relationship off several times, but that Lentz kept coming back to her until late October when she says his wife Laura found out about their alleged affair. Did he call you to tell you? Is that what he did? It was a phone call?
Yeah, he called me at midnight and he said, my wife, he was in the hallway, you can hear he was in the hallway. He's like, my wife found out and I gotta go. And I was like, I was devastated.
The next month, Hillsong firing him, citing several reasons, including, quote, moral failures. Lentz later admitting online that he had been unfaithful in my marriage without saying who he had been with. Hillsong has now begun an investigation into the culture of the church, but Kareem says Lentz's rising celebrity may have contributed to his behavior.
When you give somebody so much power, they become God to people. And I think people forgot the concept of religion and beliefs. And I think that people look at Carl like he's God to them.
I know that you've said that you have already gotten hate and people who are upset with your choices, even for having the affair with Carl in the beginning, knowing that he was married. Is there anything that you would like her to know? Anything you would like to say to her if she were to listen?
I feel bad for her. You know, woman to a woman, I don't think she deserved to be hurt the way that she did. And I never meant to hurt her.
Now, we tried to reach out to Carl Lentz to respond. He had no comment. As for Reneen Kareem, she says she just wants to move on with her life, and she says she hopes that Carl can find his true self, guys.
Leaders of the church immediately reported what they saw to Hillsong executives in Sydney, Australia. And on Wednesday, November 5th, Brian Houston made a public statement. He said, quote, "Today, Hillsong Church East Coast advised our congregation that we have terminated the employment of Pastor Carl Lentz. This action was not taken lightly and was done in the best interest of everyone, including Pastor Carl. The reason Brian gave was, quote, ongoing discussions in relation to leadership issues and breaches of trust, plus a recent revelation of moral failures," end quote. Laura, who had no involvement in the affair, was also terminated as a co-pastor with her husband. Brian and Bobby, a very interesting couple themselves. While Brian told the world of Carl's moral failures, it seems he forgot to talk about his own. Brian and Bobby Houston are no strangers to controversy. In 2008, Bobby was blasted by the Christian community after she taught and sold a series of teachings titled Kingdom Women Love and Value Their Sexuality, where she encouraged women to get plastic surgery no matter the cost as they age, and do whatever they had to do to keep their Christian husband happy. She encouraged Christian women to stay fit and then used a slur when she stated that if she gains weight, she feels like a, quote, retard. Bobby then went on an ableist rant, saying, quote, "How are you going to do anything to surprise your man when you need a hydraulic crane just to turn over in bed?" End quote. Bobby would later apologize and change the title. But in 2008, Bobby wrote in the brilliantly titled ebook, I'll Have What She's Having, that women need to submit to men and, quote, be gorgeously available for Jesus's army, end quote. And Brian. There's so much to say about Brian, but let's keep it brief as to not go into the dirty details. When Brian was young, his daddy Frank had a church. Once Brian was an adult and became a pastor himself.
Talk about religious, stuffy people sometimes. God called us to be full of life and full of power and full of the Holy Ghost. Yes. That's it.
It came out that Well, Brian's dad, Frank, was a perv who liked kids and had done a lot of horrible things throughout the years to minors in his church. Instead of reporting this to Australian police and helping the victims, Brian covered up his father's crimes, tried to pay off one of the victims, and Brian's father stepped down from the pulpit. Then, he gave his congregation to his son, who merged it with what we now know today as Hillsong. But Brian and his father's crimes couldn't hide forever, because only less than 1 year after terminating Carl, Brian stepped down from Hillsong as he was charged by Australian police in August of 2021 with 1 count of concealing a serious indictable offense by his father, Frank Houston.
Obviously, I felt, terribly sad for the victim, because there's no doubt about it. My father's done irreparable damage to his life. What we didn't do is report it to the police. I didn't see the police as an option. We didn't cover it up. We did tell people straight away. We did take his credential off him. He never did preach again. What we didn't do is report it to the police.
And we haven't even covered the wildest part of this story, which includes Laura punching another woman in the face and more deranged information that was leaked to the press regarding Carl and Brian in March and April of 2022. This is all covered in our last and final chapter. But first, let's get back to Justin, Carl, and Tyler Perry. Yes, even Mr. Medea himself plays a role in this story. After Carl's termination, he packed a bag and stayed at Justin's apartment for a while. Laura came to visit, and the two were seen looking tense outside Justin's apartment. But Justin and Hailey Bieber would soon cut all ties with Carl and Laura Lentz, unfollowing them on Instagram and no longer attending Hillsong. Carl never reached out to any members of his congregation or co-workers after his termination. Instead, he changed his phone number, packed up the family, and moved to Los Angeles, California, where they signed a lease for a $16,000 a month luxury Manhattan Beach property. Tyler Perry, who was a fan of Carl, agreed to pay $96,000 to cover 6 months of rent for Carl and his family. The beachside rental home is 5,000 square feet with 5 bedrooms. In the same month that news of the affair broke, Carl got in action and hired the same PR firm used by the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, Harry and Meghan, a firm called Sunshine Sachs. Sunshine Sachs claims to specialize in corporate image programs, crisis communication, reputation management, and more. It was reported that Carl wanted to fix his public image and that he allegedly wanted to star in his own faith-based reality show in LA. But Hollywood didn't seem interested in the scandalous pastor, and less than 1 month after Carl's termination, 3 more women claimed to have had affairs with Carl and came forward to share their stories anonymously with the press. It was reported by an anonymous source that Carl's PR firm was allegedly having a tough time improving his image because Carl continuously lied to them about what he had done, and less than 2 months after Carl's termination, Sunshine Sachs confirmed to Vanity Fair that they and Carl had parted ways. In March and April of 2022, damning details emerged about Brian Houston and Carl Lentz. Let's start with Carl. After Carl's affairs came to light, Hillsong Church hired a New York law firm to conduct an investigation into Hillsong NYC. This was meant to stay private, but the report, titled Internal Investigation Report Regarding Carl Lentz and Other Matters, was leaked to the Christian Post. The report alleged that Carl and Laura, in order to receive their severance package, were to comply with the investigators and be truthful. In a statement to the Christian Post on April 1st, a Hillsong Church spokesperson confirmed the authenticity of the report, which was based on interviews with former and current staff members, as well as former and current volunteers, and Carl and Laura Lentz. Former staffers and volunteers of the church had a lot to say, including Carl's driver, who said Carl would allegedly belittle him, bully him, and complain about the driving or the route he was taking. Investigators noted that the driver stated Carl once yelled at him for breathing too loud while he was driving. The driver stated that he was expected to be at Carl's beck and call 24/7 and never miss a call or text. The driver stated that he would have to sit outside a nightclub and wait for Carl sometimes for 3 to 5 hours, and further stated that he was removed from his position after he asked to pray for Carl during a car ride. Carl denies this and further denied being driven out to clubs late at night, but went on to say that sometimes he would take Bibles to his friend who was a DJ and distribute them. Staff also complained that Carl required he be picked up from the airport by 2 people in 2 separate cars. One person to pick Carl up and drive him where he needed to go, and another to wait around at baggage claim to pick up Carl's luggage and deliver it to his home. When asked about this by investigators, Carl said yeah, that happened, and stated that this was, quote, completely Hillsong standard. When interviewed in December 2020 about his misconduct, which allegedly involved special massages, 3 affairs, and exposing himself to his housekeeper, investigators said Carl, quote, appeared to be generally forthcoming and candid about most of it. The report went on to say that Laura stated she had hunches and vibes that the massages Carl was receiving were, quote, a bit strange. Review of Carl's text messages by the investigators showed massage therapists quoting Carl for the cost of massages and other inappropriate acts. But it was unclear from the text messages if Carl received only massages from these women or something more. It's kinda obvious this story won't have a happy ending, but Carl sure did. The report went on to say that Carl proudly told investigators he is a very good liar who deliberately took steps to cover up his indiscretions. This included boldly lying to his wife Laura when she caught Carl and their children's nanny on a couch one night. The report describes how one night in 2016, while at the home of former NBA player Tyson Chandler, Laura told investigators she didn't know their nanny was there and happened to walk in and find her and Carl together, but the 2 didn't notice her. Laura said she stood silently, watching them for 2 minutes. Then she stormed into the room, shoved Carl out of the way, clenched her fists, and then the pastor's wife punched the nanny 3 times in the face. It was the fight of her life until Carl grabbed Laura and she turned around and did the 5-point palm exploding heart technique on Carl, and as he fell to the ground, okay, no, it wasn't a scene from Kill Bill. However, the report does state that Laura punched their nanny 3 times in the face until Carl grabbed her. Investigators said that Laura was later gaslit by her husband and the nanny into thinking she had not witnessed what she saw with her own 2 eyes. Investigators said, quote, Laura said she started to feel crazy and thought to herself, did I see something? I don't know. End quote. Justin and Hailey Bieber have nothing to do with Carl or Laura Lentz these days, and a source told Vanity Fair that Justin felt used and like Carl was hijacking his entire lifestyle. And based on his Instagram and uploaded videos, it appears Judah Smith is Justin's main spiritual advisor. In 2018, Judah became the chaplain for the Seattle Seahawks NFL team. Justin has even brought Judah on stage with him to preach at some of his concerts. Joel Houston, Brian's son, and Carl's former best friend, who he started a church with, continues to make music for Hillsong and lives in California now. Although Carl never seemed to get that reality show he wanted, his ex did, as Reneen posted on her Instagram in March of 2022 that she was cast in MTV's reality show X on the Beach, in which she divulges about her affair with the married pastor. Reneen stated on the show that, quote, I don't like to be referred to as a mistress. I'm more like a mystery woman, end quote. In March of 2022, the Hillsong Global Board made a public statement on Hillsong's website where they accused Brian of 2 moral failures. The Hillsong Board stated Brian Houston was accused of sending inappropriate text messages to a Hillsong staffer, in which he told her he wanted to kiss and cuddle her. This led the staffer to resign and ask for her tithe money back from the church. The second incident happened in 2019, 1 year before Carl was terminated, when Brian wandered into another woman's hotel room in which he spent 40 minutes in after a Hillsong conference. Hillsong blamed this on Brian's anxiety medication mixing with alcohol, causing him to become confused, which is how he landed in this woman's hotel room. I gotta get through this. The Hillsong board went on to state that Pastor Brian had violated the Hillsong pastor's code of conduct. After this was released, Brian Houston officially resigned from the megachurch he started. His wife, Bobby Houston, was let go from Hillsong only 2 weeks later. This angered Brian Houston, who took to Facebook to air his grievances with the Hillsong board and ended his tirade with, quote, "Our beautiful church is losing its soul," end quote. Carl has not spoken publicly since the Instagram post he made after his termination. However, in March of 2022, he was spotted for the first time in over a year at the airport. Carl and Laura left the $4 million California rental and moved their family to Florida. Laura has stuck by her man and started her own business as an interior designer. At the time of this recording, Hillsong has lost 9 of its 16 churches in the United States, as many pastors quit or pulled their churches from the Hillsong franchise, or were forced to step down after mishandling church funds or sending lewd photos, and sometimes even worse. A Gallup poll reported that thousands of churches are closing every year as church attendance in the U.S. continues to decline, and the numbers of Americans with no religious affiliation has risen. And it's not just millennials and Gen Zers walking away. Gallup's data show declines among all major subgroups of the U.S. population beyond age. People sometimes choose to leave their church for many different reasons. Carl was about 2 months into his affair with Reneen when he appeared on Logan Paul's podcast. And near the end of that episode, while discussing quarantine and how it could affect people long term, Carl said, quote, "Quarantine is a great revealer. It reveals what you need and don't need," end quote. While Carl searches for what he needs, many ex-members of Hillsong are searching too, as they were left hurt and betrayed by Hillsong pastors and leaders. This has been a cautionary tale on what happens when the wrong people are put in positions of power with hardly any oversight. For a deeper dive into Brian Houston, the Hillsong empire and its undoing, including how Hillsong college students are made to sign non-disclosure agreements, and more shocking testimonies from Hillsong victims, I highly recommend the documentary Hillsong, A Megachurch Exposed on Discovery+.